Tonight, you are going to eat something you never actually chose. You'll open the fridge. You'll pull out chicken or beef or pork. Normal. Obvious. Boring. Except you never decided that. Someone decided it for you a very long time ago. Because on the other side of the planet, there is an animal. There are more of them alive right now than there are people in Australia. Its meat has less than 2% fat. It has more iron than beef. It was never caged, never fed grain, never pumped with antibiotics. It produces a fraction of the greenhouse gas of a cow, and almost nobody on Earth will ever eat it. For decades, in its own country, it was illegal to feed this meat to a human being, but perfectly legal to feed it to your dog. Most people assume the answer here is simple. They think it's endangered. It isn't. They think it's illegal. It mostly isn't. They think it tastes disgusting. That's not it either. The real reason is hiding inside your own head, and scientists actually have a name for it. They call it the meat paradox. By the end of this video, you'll understand something uncomfortable. The list of animals you're allowed to eat was written before you were born, and you never got a vote. Stay till the end. Because the last part isn't really about kangaroos at all. It's about you. Let's start with the thing nobody believes. The scale. Australia is home to more than 30 million kangaroos. In good years after heavy rain, that number has climbed past 40 million. The human population of Australia is around 27 million, so the kangaroos outnumber the people. They roughly match the entire national cattle herd. Think about that for a second. An entire continent quietly carrying a second population of large animals. Not livestock, not pets, just there, living wild across the grasslands and the red interior. Now, if you've never been out there, it's hard to picture. So picture this instead. It's dusk in outback New South Wales. The heat is finally breaking. You're standing in a paddock that stretches further than your eyes can process. And as the light drops, the ground starts moving. Shapes lifting out of the scrub. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Grazing across land that a farmer is trying to keep alive for sheep. This is normal there. So normal that Australia runs the largest wild animal harvest on the planet. Government scientists survey the populations by aircraft every single year. They set a quota, usually somewhere between 15 and 20% of the counted population. And most years, the industry doesn't even come close to filling it. The actual take is often closer to 3%. So no, this is not an animal on the edge of extinction. But here's what's fascinating. The meat itself might be one of the most nutritionally impressive red meats in the world. Let's talk about what's actually in it. A cut of kangaroo is usually under 2% fat. Compare that to beef, which can run 20% or higher depending on the cut. It's dense with protein. It's loaded with iron and zinc. And it contains unusually high levels of something called conjugated linoleic acid. You don't need to remember the name. Just know that it's a fatty acid researchers have studied for years for its possible health effects. Kangaroo meat has some of the highest levels found in any red meat. Then there's the climate side. For years, researchers at the University of Queensland studied the kangaroo gut. Kangaroos ferment their food, a bit like cows do. But the bacteria living inside them are different. Early work suggested kangaroos released almost no methane at all. That claim exploded around the world. Scientists started asking whether you could transplant kangaroo gut bacteria into cattle. Then, in 2013, a study led by Adam Munn tested it more carefully. Turns out kangaroos do release methane. They just release far less of it than sheep or cattle eating the same amount of food. Still a huge advantage, just not magic. And there's one more thing. Kangaroos have soft padded feet. Cattle have hooves. On thin ancient Australian topsoil, that difference actually matters. So let's line this up. Abundant. Wild. Lean. Iron-rich. Lower emissions. Gentler on the land. By every logic we claim to care about, this should be everywhere. So why isn't it on your plate? Here's where the story gets strange, because for most of human history in Australia, it absolutely was. Aboriginal Australians have lived on that continent for an astonishing length of time. Excavations at a rock shelter called Madjed Bebe, dated by Chris Clarkson and his team in 2017, pushed human occupation back to around 65,000 years. For that entire span, kangaroo was food. Real food. Central food. Cooked in ground ovens, shared across families. Every part of the animal used. tens of thousands of years of unbroken tradition. Then the ships arrived. And here's the part people never expect. The early European settlers ate kangaroo, too. They had to. The first fleet arrived in 1788 with supplies that were rotting and running out. Their crops failed in unfamiliar soil. Their sheep died. So they ate what was hopping past them. Imagine you're standing in that first settlement. You're hungry in a way you've never been hungry. The salted pork from England has turned green. And someone drags in an animal you have no word for. You eat it, and it keeps you alive. Kangaroo became so accepted that it ended up in British cookbooks. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, published in 1861, one of the most famous cookbooks ever printed, included kangaroo tail soup, a dish that Victorian households treated as slightly exotic but perfectly respectable. So let me say this clearly. There was a moment when kangaroo was on its way to becoming a normal global meat. So what killed it? Sheep and cattle. Once European livestock finally took hold in Australia, everything flipped. Suddenly there was beef, there was mutton, familiar meat, farmable meat. Meat that reminded settlers of home. And kangaroo went from survival food to something worse. It became the food of the poor, a sign that you couldn't afford real meat. Then it became something else entirely. It became a pest. Farmers watched kangaroos eat the grass they needed for their flocks, so kangaroos were shot in enormous numbers, not for food, for removal. And the carcasses had to go somewhere, which brings us to the single biggest reason your brain refuses this meat. For decades, across most of Australia, kangaroo meat was legally banned for human consumption, but entirely legal as pet food. Read that again. An entire generation of Australians grew up seeing kangaroo in one place only, the dog bowl. South Australia was the first state to legalize it for people in 1980. The rest of the country didn't follow until 1993. 1993. That is not ancient history. That is within the lifetime of most people watching this. And here's the thing about food stigma. It does not disappear when the law changes. You can rewrite a regulation overnight. You cannot rewrite a feeling. To millions of people, kangaroo had already been permanently filed under That's for Animals. But that's only half the story, because there's a second problem, and it's stamped onto the country's own government documents. Look at the Australian coat of arms, granted in 1912. On one side, an emu. On the other side, a kangaroo. The popular story is that both animals were chosen because neither can easily move backwards. A nation that only goes forward. Whether or not that's the real reason, the symbolism stuck, which means Australia is in a very rare club. It is one of the only countries on Earth that regularly eats its own national emblem. Now think about how that feels psychologically. Imagine the United States serving bald eagle burgers. Imagine India opening a chain of beef restaurants in its most traditional cities. Imagine New Zealand putting kiwi bird on the menu. Something in your gut tightens, doesn't it? That tightening is not logic, it's identity. And then, in 1968, something happened that sealed it for the entire planet. A television show, Skippy the Bush Kangaroo, a children's series about a kangaroo who solves crimes, rescues children, and understands human speech. It was sold to more than 100 countries. For millions of kids across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, that show was their first ever kangaroo. Not an animal, a character, a friend. Here's the timing that makes this almost unbelievable. At the exact moment the world was falling in love with a talking kangaroo on television, Australian law still said that same animal could only be sold as dog food. One animal, two completely opposite identities, beloved cartoon hero, and a tin on a supermarket shelf. And it might be the strangest part of all because your brain was already primed for this. In 1943, an Austrian scientist named Konrad Lorenz described something he called the baby schema. He noticed that certain physical features trigger an automatic caretaking response in humans. Large eyes, a small nose, a rounded head, soft movements. We are hardwired to protect things that look like that. It's why you melt at puppies. It's why cartoon characters have oversized eyes. Now picture a Joey. Enormous dark eyes, tiny nose, soft rounded face, peering out of its mother's pouch. That animal hits almost every single trigger Lorenz described. Your brain does not classify it as food. Your brain classifies it as a baby. So, what did that mean for the industry? It meant that even where kangaroo was legal, delicious, and cheap, the emotional wall stayed up. But the wall wasn't only emotional. There was a practical problem too. And it comes down to how this meat is actually produced. Because kangaroo is not farmed. People have tried. It doesn't work. Kangaroos can clear fences that stop cattle. They get stressed in confinement. They don't fatten up the way livestock does. They need enormous ranges to live normally. So kangaroo meat is one of the only wild harvested meats sold at industrial scale anywhere on Earth, which means it's taken like this. Imagine you are there. It's the middle of the night in the outback. Total silence except for insects. A licensed shooter drives slowly across a dark paddock with a spotlight. The code of practice requires a single headshot for a clean, instant kill. The animal is field dressed right there in the dirt, then hung in a chilled truck and driven, sometimes for hours, to a processing facility. Now compare that to a cow. A cow walks into a sealed, temperature-controlled, inspected facility. Every stage indoors, every stage monitored. Kangaroo starts its journey in an open paddock at 2 in the morning. And that difference created the industry's greatest vulnerability: contamination risk, which is exactly what brought the whole thing crashing down. By the 2000s, kangaroo meat had found an unlikely champion: Russia. Russia was importing kangaroo meat in huge volumes, using it in processed products like sausage. At its peak, Russia was taking a majority of Australia's kangaroo meat exports. The industry was booming. Then, in 2009, Russian food safety authorities banned it. The reason given was bacterial contamination: E. coli, salmonella. Overnight, the biggest customer on Earth vanished. Australian producers watched their market evaporate. Processing plants closed. Jobs disappeared. And the reputation damage went global. That's the moment kangaroo meat stopped being the next big thing. But there's another force working against it, and it's not about hygiene at all. It's about ethics. In the United States, the state of California has banned the import and sale of kangaroo products for most of the last 50 years. The ban was suspended for a period, then reinstated in 2016. In recent years, members of Congress have pushed legislation aimed at kangaroo products entirely, and the pressure worked in an unexpected place: football boots. Kangaroo leather was prized by boot makers for being thin, soft, and incredibly strong. Then in 2023, after sustained campaigning, both Nike and Puma announced they were phasing kangaroo leather out. Two of the largest sportswear companies in the world, gone. So think about the position this animal is in. Too abundant to be protected, too loved to be eaten, too wild to be farmed, too controversial to be exported. And then, on top of all of that, there's one final problem: the cooking. Remember that 2% fat figure? That's the health benefit. It's also the trap. Fat is what forgives you in the kitchen. Fat keeps meat juicy when you leave it on the heat too long. Kangaroo has almost none. So if you cook it the way you cook a steak, well done, right through, it turns into leather. Dry, tough, metallic. Chefs will tell you it needs to be seared fast and served rare, then rested. But most people don't know that. They buy it once, out of curiosity. They overcook it. They decide kangaroo tastes terrible, and they never buy it again. One bad dinner, and the verdict is permanent. So now we get to the real answer, the one that isn't about Australia at all. Because the deepest reason you don't eat kangaroo is happening inside your own mind. Start with language. We rarely eat animals by name. We eat beef, not cow. We eat pork, not pig. We eat veal, not calf. Those words came into English centuries ago, and they do something quietly powerful. They put a wall between the meal and the animal. Now say kangaroo. There is no other word, no disguise, no buffer. You are naming the animal while you eat it. And that matters more than you'd think. In 2012, a psychologist named Bastian, then at the University of Queensland, published research on what he called the meat paradox. The paradox is simple. Most people say they care about animals. Most people also eat animals. Those two beliefs sit badly together. So the mind resolves it. Bastian's experiments found that when people were told an animal was going to be eaten, they rated that animal as having less capacity to think and to suffer. Not because the animal changed, because the label did. We adjust our beliefs to protect our appetite, and that adjustment only works if we don't look too closely. Kangaroo makes you look. Then there's disgust itself. In 1987, researchers Rozin and April Fallon showed that food disgust is not something you're born with. It's learned, mostly in early childhood. You absorb it from the people around you, which means your food revulsion isn't really yours. It's inherited. You never reasoned your way to it. You were handed it. The anthropologist Marvin Harris argued something similar in his book, Good to Eat, in 1985. He believed food taboos usually have practical roots buried underneath the moral language. The rule comes first. The justification is invented afterwards. And that's what makes this whole thing so unsettling. Because think about how arbitrary it really is. In parts of Asia, dog is food, and Westerners are horrified. In France, horse is food, and Britain and America recoil. In India, the cow is sacred, and the American hamburger looks obscene. In much of Australia, kangaroo is a national symbol and a supermarket product at the same time. Nobody in any of these places thinks they're being arbitrary. Everyone thinks they're being normal. Small groups have tried to break the pattern. Around 2010, a movement appeared in Australia with a strange name: kangatarians, people who stopped eating farmed meat entirely but still ate kangaroo. Their argument was blunt. A wild animal that lived free and died in 1 second may be more ethical than an animal raised in confinement. You can agree or disagree, but it's a real argument. And here's the number that ends the debate for most Australians. Even in the country where it's legal, sold in supermarkets, and served in restaurants, surveys have repeatedly found that only around 1 in 7 Australians eats kangaroo more than a couple of times a year. Most never eat it at all. The meat is right there, on the shelf, cheap, legal, healthy, and they walk past it. So zoom out with me for a second. You are an animal that eats other animals. Every human culture on Earth does this, but no culture eats everything available to it. Every single one draws a line. And here's the strange truth about that line. You did not draw it. You inherited it. It was shaped by which animals your ancestors could farm, by which ones ate the crops they needed, by which ones ended up on a coat of arms, by which ones a television show made lovable in 1968, by a law written in 1993, by a trade ban in 2009, by an advert you saw as a child. None of that is nutrition. None of that is ethics. None of that is even taste. That's history, politics, and accident, all quietly dressed up as instinct. And you feel it as a gut reaction. You feel it as obviously true. That's the part that should stop you. Because if the wall between food and not food can be built by something as small as a children's TV show, then how much else of what feels natural to you is just something you absorbed? Your disgust feels ancient. It's usually about 50 years old. So tonight, when you open that fridge, look at what's inside, not at what's there, at what isn't. Somebody decided that for you. And you've been calling their decision your own taste ever since.